Hello, my name is Parke Wilde and I have a question. Should the federal government stop encouraging Americans to consume more beef, pork, and cheese? You may say to yourself, I didn't even know the federal government did encourage Americans to consume more beef, pork, and cheese. But it does. To help explain the federal government's internally inconsistent position on this issue, this video describes the much misunderstood world of federal commodity checkoff programs. Sponsors of beef ads with the slogan, Beef, it's what's for dinner. Pork ads with the now mostly obsolete slogan, Pork, the other white meat, and newer slogans including, Don't be blah. And dairy partnerships to persuade pizza companies to cram more cheese into every corner than you might have thought humanly possible. Many people think these promotional campaigns are private sector operations, but in fact they are well-funded, government-sponsored, public-private partnerships. They are established by Congress, managed by producer boards, overseen by USDA's Agricultural Marketing Service, funded by mandatory assessments on producers using the federal government's power of taxation, explicitly tasked with expanding consumer demand, and legally classified as sponsors not of commercial speech, but of government speech, a controversy I will tell you more about in a bit. The leading checkoff programs have revenues from mandatory assessments in the most recent available year of $113 million for dairy, including cheese, $92 million for fluid milk, $68 million for pork, and $41 million for beef. There are many smaller checkoff programs, including just a little for selected fruits and vegetables such as avocados and potatoes, but by far the greatest funding is for animal products. The total for these top four is $314 million in a single year, vastly more than is spent on any federal government advertising or promotion for fruits and vegetables or whole grains. Let's take the beef, dairy, and pork programs in turn. The Beef Checkoff program describes its work in annual reports, and also in economic evaluations by leading agricultural economists. For example, this one in January 2018 found that effects of prices on beef demand have fallen over time. The beef industry should build on favorable trends among high beef consuming African American and Hispanic consumers. And the effects of media coverage and consumer values have become more important than the effects of prices and incomes. Regarding values, the authors found that consumers who care about taste and appearance tend to buy more beef. But the industry should think how to respond to those troublesome consumers who buy less beef because their food values center on the environment, naturalness, animal welfare, and worst of all, nutrition. The Dairy Checkoff program is described in an annual report from USDA to Congress. I say annual, even though USDA for almost 5 years stopped sharing the report on its website and would not even respond for a time to my Freedom of Information Act request in 2017 for the recent reports, until a nonpartisan nonprofit organization in the Midwest called the Organization for Competitive Markets also picked up the topic, issued a press release, and persuaded the federal government to post the report. The most recent annual report shows the challenge for the industry. Fluid milk consumption per capita has been falling rapidly for many years, while cheese consumption has been rising. So it is not surprising that the independent economic evaluation for this checkoff program by another team of leading agricultural economists found that for every $1 of checkoff investment, net profit increases by almost $3 for fluid milk promotion, more than $7 for cheese, and $32 for butter. In other words, the checkoff program's sponsored evaluation research says dairy producers can enjoy an especially high benefit-cost ratio, persuading people to eat more cheese and butter. The industry takes this conclusion to heart. It does spend some effort getting people to drink more fluid milk, such as this ad to get kids to drink sweetened milk. And it does put some effort into yogurt, such as this sweetened yogurt-based product for kids. But most notably, it puts a lot of effort into promoting more cheese consumption, including in partnership arrangements with leading branded pizza companies such as Pizza Hut and Domino's. even though checkoff programs are mostly designed to support non-branded generic commodities. The pork checkoff program, following a pattern that also holds true for the other programs, centers on a partnership between the federal government semi-public checkoff board, the National Pork Board, and a private sector trade association, the National Pork Producers Council, which makes tens of millions of dollars as the prime contractor to the checkoff board, and which has none of the restrictions of a semi-public operation. For example, even using money it earned originally from the checkoff board, the private trade association may lobby the government to influence policy. In 2006, the pork industry developed a procedure for speeding up this process of transferring money from the semi-public checkoff board to the trade association. It worked like this. The National Pork Producers Council sold the intellectual property rights to the slogan "Pork the Other White Meat" to the semi-public checkoff board for $60 million to be paid in installments of $3 million per year for 20 years. This way, without having to do further work, the private trade association could get additional revenue of $3 million per year from the mandatory assessments whose collection is enforced by the federal government. At the time, in 2006, I asked for the appraisal on which the sale price was based. Just like when a person sells a home, I figured there must be some basis for the price. I did not think $60 million could possibly be a reasonable price, because who else would want this slogan? Were the artichoke producers bidding up the price for the slogan, "Pork the Other White Meat"? But even in response to my FOIA request, the federal government only shared with me a highly censored version of the appraisal, with all the key information blacked out. Years later, in about 2012, folks from the Humane Society of the United States, a nonprofit animal protection organization, read some of my old articles, filed their own Freedom of Information Act request, and pressed their case more vigorously in court than I had the stomach to try to do. So they finally got access to the full appraisal, and it really did not do a good job of justifying the high price. Finally, after years of litigation by the Humane Society, just this February 2018, a federal court agreed about the flaws in the expert appraisal and halted the $3 million annual payments, at least for the time being. The judge wrote, "Neither the agency nor the expert adequately explains why this calculation sheds any light on what the 2016 review was supposed to ascertain, the current value of the set of 4 trademarks to the agency." Pork industry organizations are likely to appeal this ruling in the near future. Here's why this matters. Nutrition science does not provide a sound basis for encouraging Americans to eat more beef, pork, and cheese. The most recent External Scientific Advisory Committee for the federal government's dietary guidelines conducted systematic literature reviews that reached the following conclusion. The U.S. population should be encouraged to consume dietary patterns that are rich in vegetables, fruit, whole grains, seafood, legumes, and nuts, moderate in low and non-fat dairy products and alcohol, lower in red and processed meat, and low in sugar-sweetened foods and beverages and refined grains. The advisory committee also considered what diets were environmentally sustainable, finding that a diet that is higher in plant-based foods and lower in calories in animal-based foods is more health-promoting and is associated with less environmental impact than is the current U.S. diet. Given all this, why does the federal government even do this? 2 reasons are most commonly given: to respond to the political power of the beef, pork, and dairy industries, and also to avoid a market failure from insufficient provision of public goods. The idea is that unlike sellers of a brand name product, sellers of a commodity product such as beef, pork, or cheese have insufficient economic incentive to advertise. To me, as an economist, this would only make sense as a public interest argument if Americans actually were eating too little beef or pork, or perhaps if we were seeing too little advertising for our psychological health. This public goods argument came up in the most important court case ever to address the checkoff programs, a Supreme Court case whose oral arguments were in 2004. In this case, dissonant producers said it was wrong for the government to force them to pay mandatory assessments if they disagreed with the resulting commercial marketing messages. The federal government's response on behalf of the checkoff organizations was that these marketing messages aren't commercial messages, they're government speech, like government public interest messages to wear your seatbelt. Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg questioned this reasoning in oral argument, asking whether this government speech was consistent with what health authorities were saying. I agree with Justice Ginsburg's question, but the majority of the court ruled that checkoff messages were indeed government speech, the government's own message, so the checkoff programs were permitted to continue operating. Many related topics are discussed in the book Food Policy in the United States, an Introduction, whose second edition has been released in March 2018 by Taylor and Francis and Routledge as part of the EarthScan Food and Agriculture series. You can learn more there about advertising, regulation, market failures, dietary guidance, industry politics, and checkoff programs. Should the federal government stop encouraging Americans to consume more beef, pork, and cheese? Yes. It may be some time before U.S. authorities actually encourage eating less meat and cheese. For now, given the scientific evidence for nutrition and the environment, it is enough to say there is no reason for the federal government to promote eating more. At present, the federal government's messages on this issue are internally inconsistent. Beef, pork, and cheese advertising could be left to the private sector.